truthfully one of the most amazing days of my life. It's just been one session better than the next. So you guys are at the prime time, because I think we're going to have another great time here. And I'm so glad you all are here for it. And I am Nan Sonater. I am the director of the Provincetown Book Festival. I'm so happy to see you all here. But I am here just to introduce the introducer, and that is the wonderful novelist Julia Glass, who is also, I think of her as the godmother of the Provincetown Book Festival. She's been with us since the beginning and been extremely useful in her advice and expertise. And she's a member of an incredible advisory committee made up of authors and artists and people involved with books who have really put this thing together. And I just facilitate it. So here's Julia.
Thank you, everybody. And Nan is way too modest because she is the godmother and the god everything. She's the god of this festival, and I am honored I was so honored when she called me. How many years ago? Is it 6, 7 years now? 7 years. But I don't think people understand how long it takes to put this thing together. And I think it's kind of around Valentine's Day that I anticipate that first email from Nan that goes out to those of us who love being involved with this. And it's like, okay, you lovely people, here we go again. And we start this long process of figuring out who to invite and how to put people up and how to put it all together. So Nan, thank you for including me. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing these two lovely authors. I will say that I got to meet Alice last October when we were together. Actually, I was going to say on stage, but we were at a church together at twin pulpits overlooking this congregation of readers. And we did an event together, and I've been so looking forward to getting to just sit in the audience and listen to Alice. And I have just met Buck, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation too. So, Alice Elliot Dark is the author of the novels Fellowship Point and Think of England, and 2 collections of short stories, In the Gloaming and Naked to the Waist. Her work has appeared in, among others, The New Yorker, Harper's, Double Take, Plowshares, A Public Space, Best American Short Stories, Prize Stories, the O. Henry Awards, and has been translated into many languages. In the Gloaming, a story, was chosen by John Updike for inclusion in the Best American Short Stories of the Century and was made into films by HBO and Trinity Playhouse. Her nonfiction reviews and essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many anthologies. She is a recipient of a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts and an associate professor at Rutgers Newark in the English department and the MFA program. A.C. Burch writes LGBTQ+ fiction that explores themes of identity, sexuality, and personal transformation, focusing on those who eschew the mainstream. His 2015 debut novel was The Homeport Journals. The book received critical acclaim for its vivid descriptions of Provincetown and its authentic portrayal of the struggles and triumphs of a chosen family that spanned age, gender identity, and sexual preference. In 2016, he released A Book of Revelations, short stories that Kirkus described as a collection of crackerjack plot twists in which unlikely heroes seize the day. The Distance Between Us, the sequel to Burch's debut novel, features a talented female impersonator falsely accused of murder who uses her considerable talent and ample wardrobe to clear her name. Themes of gentrification and small-town life are woven into the narrative, whose fiercely loyal protagonist challenges negative attitudes toward drag performers. An amateur photographer and sailor, A.C. Burch is an advocate for equal rights and representation in literature, and the performing arts. He divides his time between Provincetown and South Beach, Florida. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that intro. And thank you so much for having me, Nan, and the board of the festival. I've never been to Provincetown. I've always wanted to, really always wanted to, for like 50 years. So this is like a dream come true to be here. And I got an incredible tour yesterday from Buck of, I think I saw everything. And that just makes it all the more special because now I know. So we're each going to just read a little bit from our books to start out. And I'll say up front that Fellowship Point is about 2 80-year-old women and 1 26-year-old woman. They each have point of view chapters, and the main plot is a land plot. The 2 80-year-old women have shares in a piece of land in Maine called Fellowship Point. This about 130-year-long fellowship started by one of their great-grandfathers, and the time has come when the land is being threatened. I won't tell you the whole inheritance mechanism because it took me like a year to figure it out, but and then to figure out the legalities of it. But it comes down to the main character, Agnes Lee, really needs 2 other shareholders to agree with her to break the trust, which she wants to do because she wants the land to go to a land trust, and after she dies, so she can be sure that this beautiful piece of land is preserved. She thinks this is a no-brainer because the other 2 people are her 80-year-long best friend who she knew since they were babies, and her favorite nephew. But surprise, surprise, they are both have objections for reasons that she didn't foresee. And then, we're off to the races from there. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning of the book that depicts that conflict in the beginning, explains a little more about the land plot, and then describes the piece of land that they're concerned with. So let's see, it's about 6 pages in. Polly and Agnes are in Agnes's apartment in Philadelphia having a drink. So what's going on? Don't keep me waiting any longer, Polly said. Agnes reached for the Cape Deal Gazette. This came today. Remember our old friend, Ham Luce? I'd rather not. Polly took a healthy swig. It's about his son, Ham Luce Jr., and their development company. Read the article here. She had the paper open to the offending page and handed it over. My glasses are in the hallway, Polly said. Use mine. Agnes took a pair from a basket on the side table to her left. Polly put them on. She gave a quick glance around. She wants a mirror, Agnes thought, for God's sake. The habit of pretty. Are they strong enough? Can you see? Yep. Polly rarely acknowledged Agnes's little digs. Marriage to Dick Wister and 3 sons had inured her to teasing. Ham Luce Jr. is large, isn't he? That's not the problem. Just read it. Aloud? No, it already ruined my lunch, Agnes said. The story was about the groundbreaking ceremony for a new luxury condominium and marina complex near Dealtown, which was close to her and Polly's houses on Fellowship Point. The resort was being built by the firm of Luce Properties, owned by Ham Luce and his sons, Ham Jr. and Terrence, known as Teeter. As Polly read the article, Agnes gazed at her, first in an attitude of waiting, but then with a sudden objectivity. She rarely stepped back from Polly long enough to see her. 20 years earlier, Polly's hair had turned all white, the gleaming kind of white that looked ageless and soft. She wore it either in a headband or barrettes, as she always had. They spent summers in houses next door on Fellowship Point and lived within blocks of each other in Philadelphia until Polly moved out to Haverford after her daughter Lydia was born. She'd wanted a backyard for her boys so she could enjoy the baby in peace. Polly made her opinions and motives and intentions plainly apparent. She was never confusing or devious, a real Quaker lady, plain and good. When they were girls, Polly was often invited along on other families' vacations and cruises and on day trips to see plays in New York or monuments in Washington, D.C. Every teacher at school was glad to have her in the room, even the blue stockings, usually resistant to more social types. Yet for all Polly's popularity, she was also underestimated, her unflappability interpreted as middling brain power. This wasn't accurate. Polly was smart, but she didn't develop her thoughts. Agnes had for a time given her lessons on how to be more penetrating. Polly had listened graciously and carried on being herself. Odd to have a best friend who was received so effortlessly by the world when Agnes inadvertently offended more than a few people. So it had always been, and she was used to it, which didn't make it unremarkable. Polly laid the paper back on the coffee table and crossed her arms protectively over her middle. Darn it, I always loved that spot. I know, Agnes said. That's bad enough, but how about when Ham Jr. said he plans to build more resorts on Cape Deal and that his ideal property is Fellowship Point? Sickening. And what about when he said everyone has their price? Polly was upset. Agnes was thrilled to have horror met with horror. He's appalling. Once when Polly and Agnes were 14, they'd seen Ham Loose, Sr., now an old man, and a gang of his pals invade the Sank and shoot an eagle flying back to her nest with food for her cheeping offspring. He'd also kicked gravel at their bare legs on the playground in Dealtown. Polly had tried to understand these actions through the lens of class grievances and local versus away people. And though Agnes normally adored a good sociological analysis, in this case it was an obfuscation, and she'd gotten Polly back on track by writing a vow for both of them to recite that included preventing Ham from doing any further harm to Fellowship Point. They pricked their index fingers and pressed them tight to each other to seal the deal. Okay, I'm going to skip to just one little more part. Agnes picked up an envelope from the side table. Now for Robert's letter. She handed the envelope to Polly, who sighed as she drew the pages out. It's so sad about Hiram, she said. Poor Robert, is he all right? Hiram was the longtime caretaker at the Point, and Robert is his son who's taken over. He's also a pretty well-known landscape architect, but in their world, he's the caretaker. He still does that for them. Maybe the letter will tell us. Polly frowned. Can you not tease for 5 seconds? Sorry, go ahead. Agnes was thinking of her teasing ancestors, especially her father. A handsome man could get away with it. Dear Agnes, it was good to speak with you the other day. Hearing your voice, well, I feel better. I should have said Hiram just died. I remember once when a pious visitor expressed shock over you and Polly laughing in the graveyard. If you can't laugh at death, what can you laugh at, you barked. I have reminded myself of that these days. It's difficult to know how best to mourn, what's efficient, effective, and honorable. I hit on an answer today. I thought you'd want to hear about it. I parked my car off Shore Road at the top of Point Path. It snowed overnight, so the ground was dusted and a light wind blew, rattling the ice branches. I pictured Hiram, how his gait expressed his essential traits: dignity, caution, sense of purpose. I don't know where he is now, and I, like you, have never been tempted to subscribe to any notion of an afterlife. I'm content to remember him as he was. He was so often on Fellowship Point, even after we moved away. We're better to think of him. I came to the bottom of the hill and stood at the north end surveying the whole point. I looked straight down the full length of the path to the sank. That's what they call the bird sanctuary. From that distance, it appeared as an olive-rounded dome that made me wish I could paint. It's an Arthur Dove for sure. Then I took a deep breath, and the full feel of the place came to me. The pine scents, the bird calls, the booming of the rolling ocean. I headed straight down and checked on the eagle's nests. All looked well, no signs of trespassing or disturbance. I won't check again till after the eaglets hatch, if any do this year. I walked by the site of the Abenaki summer camp and all around the shoreline, and then back up Point Path. By the graveyard, I thought of old friends and older inhabitants of what my father and yours called God's country. Thank you for offering a place for him there, but my mother wants him in her churchyard. His spirit will always be on Fellowship Point in any case. I look forward to taking this walk together very soon. Thanks.
I have a situation where I'm talking about the second novel in the series, and it's interesting because as I talked with Alice, there's a lot that we have in common, and one of the things I'd like us to talk a little bit about is longtime friendships and elderly people. So I'd like to give you just a quick run-through of what happens in the first book and then spend a little more time on the second. So the Homeport Journalist begins with a young man who's escaped an abusive relationship. He's driven from New York and kept driving, come into Massachusetts, and we all know if you keep driving in Massachusetts, you end up here. And he did. He encountered an elderly Portuguese woman whose grocery bags had ripped in the rain on Commercial Street. He helped her go back to where she lived, which was on the grounds of a magnificent estate. What I essentially did was take the Lancey Mansion, where the Corteil Gallery is, and move it to where the Murchison House is at Pilgrim's Landing. So for those of you that know the town, that's the gist of that. And Dory is the name of the elderly Portuguese woman, and she basically finagles or educates Mark, the young man, to go to the mansion house. She lives right next door. To go to the mansion house and apply for a job with the elderly recluse who lives there. And she basically hires people to have company, but she's an old, inherited, multi-generational Yankee, a whaling family fortune. He gets the job. And one of the first people he meets throws open the shower as he's totally undressed, taking a shower, and says, "I'm Mrs. Danvers. Welcome to Mandalay." Gives him a quick look and says, "You'll do very well in this town." That was Helena Handbasket. And one of the other people that Lola Staunton, the recluse, had hired, she made housekeeper. And Helena was just a character, dressing in all sorts of different costumes, and nobody paid any attention. You know, she'd walk around as Mrs. Danvers, and then she'd show up as somebody else, and she was the comic relief for this book. As the story goes on, it turns out that Dory, the Portuguese lady, and Lola were fast friends for the first 20 or so years of their lives. And then it was said that Lola's father killed Dory's mother. It was gossip around town, it was never proved, and there was a 60-year estrangement, and you'll see why I'm spending a little time on this when we talk. So, excuse me, it turns out that Helena and Mark and another employee named Cole, who is an artist, are instrumental in getting the two to reconcile. So the story moves forward, and there's a chosen family that's formed, and it's quite a wonderful thing, spanning ages, and they are looking out for these two elderly people, but in their own way, the elderly people are looking out for them as well, and it's just a wonderfully loving story at that point, if I may say so myself. And then, of course, Lola and Dory are in advanced age, so they start making provisions, because Lola is the end of the line for the Staunton name, and they start making provisions for their vast estate and money and land, much along the situation of Polly and Agnes in Fellowship Point. And so the book essentially ends with the death of Lola and Dory, and the marriage of Mark and Cole. And they wrap up kind of the tale there. And Helena has found an admirer, a fisherman, an outdoorsman, and he's crazy about her. So we leave the book there with a generous inheritance for the chosen family and a legacy, hence the term in our title, a legacy to execute a number of bequests that Lola and Dory have essentially been putting together with much joy. I mean, they've had a lot of fun just knowing the havoc they're going to wreak from beyond. So that takes us to the distance between us. And it was an appreciable amount of time between the two books, and several things happened. There started to be the tremendous pushback against the trans and drag communities. In Provincetown, as many of you are familiar, there became an incredible housing situation, extremely difficult for all involved. And I also read the letter that Billy Porter sent to the New York Times talking about his abuse at the hands of his stepfather. And all of these things sort of converged in my mind, and I thought, I want to do something that speaks to, that pushes back against this kind of hate and talks about the various issues that I've just described. And I spent a lot of time thinking how to do it, and I realized that perhaps the best way to get the message across, because I didn't want to just preach to the choir, I wanted to pose to people who were believing the nonsense that's being thrown at them. I wanted to pose the notion that maybe they could grow to like someone who actually dresses a man who dresses in female clothing all the time. And I thought the best way through that is comedy. It's the subtle approach. You get them laughing and they think later. And so that is basically the genesis of the distance between us in terms of what I wanted to do. And the way the story basically falls out is, I mentioned Helena has married. She's now executing these bequests. She's already founded an artist colony, and she's peppered the whole place with artists and residents and painters and authors. And then the next bequest is to build a museum to house the $400 million worth of art that was found in the Homeport Mansion. So suffice to say, Helena is a very busy person, and her husband isn't particularly happy about it. And so what happens in the book is that she's busily trying to get the museum going, dealing with an artist, a temperamental artist who is planning to donate a fortune in paintings to the museum. They've also established a fund to buy up properties and renovate them so that they can house local people, as opposed to shipping them off to boxes somewhere. They want to try to keep the community going. So she's got her hands full. And then, on the day of the opening, she goes into the museum, and all of the paintings that were supposed to be donated to the museum have been defaced. And there's no indication how anyone could get in or out. And then she tries to reconcile with the artist, and they go up to the studio where the artist has a painting for Helena, and they find a body. So it wasn't a good day. So the story unfolds beyond that. Helena goes undercover, tries to solve the mystery, and in the process, comedy ensues, and there are a number of things that happen that I will leave to those who want to read the book. What I'd like to do right now is just take a brief moment to read what I consider the transformation scene. It's one of my favorites. I confess I struggled with it for some time because I wanted to make sure that readers understood the notion early on in the book that they were dealing with a man who presented as female. As a female impersonator, and there's explanation in the book that talks about the difference between those things. So just a brief scene here. It's about, let me see here. It's about 12 pages in. Time for a change. Harold Blythe rose early from his ornate four-poster in the master bedroom of the Homeport Mansion. He refused to dwell on how poorly he'd slept or how vast and empty the bed had felt. Instead, he showered, then shaved his face, chest, and nether regions with extra care before brushing his teeth, blow-drying his hair, and donning a wig cap. Harold continued his morning ritual in the lavish dressing room adjoining the master suite. This pale purple room was filled with tall wardrobes, crammed with evening gowns and accessories. Staring at his nakedness in an enormous gilt mirror, he pondered a paradox that had stymied him for as long as he could remember. Were this reflection another man's body, he'd be attracted, if not aroused. Yet, when he studied his image, all he saw was the dire need for a makeover. When it comes to panty lines, where there's a penis, there's a problem, Harold said as he stepped into a white cotton gaff. With a rapid motion of his right hand, he pushed the troublesome bits between his legs while snugging the gaff into place with his left hand. The entire process took just a few seconds. Harold studied his reflection again, made a minor tweak, then sat down at an ornate dressing table to do his makeup. The meticulous effort complete, he donned a padded white bra and a black pageboy wig. Then, as he did at the start of every new day, Harold smiled into the mirror and said, "Good morning, Helena. Welcome back, darling. What shall we wear today?" All traces of Harold safely tucked away, Helena handbasket, tastefully attired in a purple business suit with matching purse, waited outside a nearby bedroom for the sound of gentle snoring. Once confident her grandmother had made it through another night, Helena tiptoed to a window near the kitchen stairs. As she did most mornings, she surveyed the cottages and studios scattered over the 20 acres of the Homeport estate. Despite the early hour, many artists and residents were already hard at work. The notion of so much creative energy in one spot always made Helena smile. She was, after all, in charge of the place. Looking over at the former servants' wing, Helena recalled the days when it was a grotesque L known as the Bates Motel. It was now faculty housing, perfectly integrated with the mansion's architecture, its elegant suites furnished with modern amenities. If those temperamental painters and writers only knew what that place was like when I lived there, there'd be fewer faculty meetings. The guy next door turning tricks, the wind rattling in the windows. It seems like another life. Even with the renovation, some still found fault. In a recent meeting, an illustrious faculty member had declared the lack of an ice maker to be an inhibitor to his creative output. Glancing to her left, Helena watched Dolores Delgado, faithful family retainer, park her vintage Edsel near the kitchen door. Dolores was the only person allowed to park near the mansion. Even Helena used the staff lot off the service road to avoid disturbing the artist at work. Immaculately dressed as always, her towering beehive hairdo reminiscent of a beef eater's helmet, Dolores was the guardian of Homeport's traditions and its resident gorgon. Helena blew a kiss her way. Dolores treats this place like a royal abode. Imagine Buckingham Palace guarded by 100 elderly women wearing black uniforms and beehives, like something out of an old Monty Python skit. God bless her. She's an anachronism and still scares me half to death, but I don't know what I'd do without her. Dolores had tended the reclusive heiress Lola Staunton with regard bordering on fealty until her death at 96. 2 years later, when Dory, Lola's half-sister, passed away, Dolores transferred her devotion to Helena, the estate's current chatelaine. Not a day passed when Helena didn't think of the Staunton sisters, whom she'd helped reconcile after decades of estrangement. In their final years, they'd created a family of their own from a diverse group of young people, gay and straight, who were devoted to both women. In appreciation, Lola and Dory had left significant portions of their vast fortune to their chosen family, who remain close to this day. Rituals established during the reign of Lola's grandmother, Letitia, breakfast trays, afternoon tea in the parlor, and dinner in the formal dining room continued even once the grounds were filled with faculty and students. These outmoded practices were often a challenge, but memories of Lola and Dory outweighed the inconvenience. Besides, no one dared tell Dolores to change her ways.
There, how's that? Okay. So, yeah, when we started to talk to each other about this event, we realized we had a lot of themes in common in our books. And I'm gonna read the list I wrote, and then we'll talk about them. Place, community, conservation, art, friendship, mystery, homage to older novels, coincidence, and probably more, but
Indigenous sacred places.
indigenous sacred places, yes. Yes, that's very important. So let's start with place. So this place is really imbuing the whole atmosphere of your book, and it's like the central love of the book, I would say. There are lots of different loves, but I'd say that's the central love. So what does writing about Provincetown, what do you really want to get across to people, and how does Provincetown inspire you?
I'm so inspired by Provincetown because in many ways, I started a whole new life when I first came here. We came in 1987. I became a resident immediately, and for a long time we did the bi-coastal thing. You know, you get here, be here whenever you could, and then go someplace else because you had to work. And then in 1997 we bought our home off Franklin Street, and I got to meet so many wonderful people. In particular, Roger Skillings was a tremendous friend and mentor. We lived next door to him. And for those that don't know of Roger, he was founder of the Fine Arts Work Center and chair of the writing committee for a number of years. And I found myself here in Provincetown, and I found that I had a tremendous sense of love and gratitude. And I think that you're absolutely right. There's a love affair with Provincetown in what I'm writing. But I also think the place influenced me profoundly. I trained as a classical musician. I wrote one story when I was in the 4th grade, and it came back with so many red marks on it I didn't write anything more for another 45, 50 years. But I found myself among writers, and I found myself appreciating what they did, and I admired and found myself being that way in a sense, and growing into it gradually. But I do think that the town changed me. It brought me to that place, and just the incredible beauty. It's never the same. There's something new everywhere you look. The land itself changes. There's just so much to love.
So how do you manage to stay inside enough to write?
I'm pretty good that way. One of the things about being an orchestral musician and going to a conservatory, you practice and practice and practice and practice. So I'm relatively disciplined. So I start my day by going out for a walk with my golden retriever, Dory, and we walk around and I take some pictures and sometimes I post them on Instagram. And then I come back and I have a little shed in the bottom yard, and it's got a wonderful old wood stove that heats it in the winter. And I sit down and I put music. I always listen to music when I write. That's another thing we have in common. We both wrote to Philip Glass, which we were stunned to discover when we talked. Both the Homeport Journals and The Distance Between Us was all written to the music of Philip Glass, and I believe it gave it a kind of an ethereal, ephemeral quality. So I do my writing, and I get that out of the way, and then life is allowed to proceed when I'm done.
So one of the things you say in the book is that, well, you talk a lot about this, but about the importance of people in a small space like this, in a small town like this, to preserve what's special about it, to have a sense of community. So how did you decide to write about the community in your book?
I feel in many ways that I got so angry about what I see as, and I don't want to be too political here, but some missed opportunities earlier on in Provincetown, where the town government might have anticipated things that were likely to happen, an influx of retirees. Certainly couldn't anticipate a pandemic or things like that, but the Airbnb growth was known for quite some time. We're getting a reaction now, but to me it was too late. So I think I got my Irish up and felt like, you know, one of the things that I could do, as Helena is sort of my personal Valkyrie, she could push for community, and she could push for the idea that this is essential. And I really, really believe that. As I understand it, Alice, you're experiencing some of the similar things in Maine.
Yeah,
right?
similar. The place we go to in the summer, which is Mount Desert Island. Yes, especially since the pandemic. There was sort of like a feeding frenzy, and a lot of property was changed hands in various ways. And it's, you know, there's all the little towns on the island are dealing with how many Airbnb nights a week, how many, you know, how does that figure into the tax base for the town, all of these issues. And really, that's sort of a problem above the real problem, which is the real problem is that until maybe fairly recently, maybe 30 years ago, these were small fishing towns. And there were also very rich people there.
Mm-hmm.
But the rich people were hidden, and you really didn't see them. And then, you know, and the towns carried on as towns. And now it's just it's very different. People who work on the island as in middle-class jobs, the nurses, the teachers, and then, of course, the seasonal workers, the restaurant workers, none of them can afford to live in the town. And even though there's some very powerful proposals to build housing for middle-class people to be able to stay on the island and not have to drive like 2 hours to teach at the elementary school, there's a lot of opposition to that. There's a lot of NIMBYism, which is kind of shocking.
Mm-hmm.
And no one knows exactly what to do about it. It's sort of, it's new, and it's just causing so much conflict in such a beautiful place. And I don't know where it's going to go. You know, there are people have powerful voices on both sides, and people who have powerful thinking on both sides. And it's never going to go back, though, to the way it was. That's, you know, that's gone. And I think that's like a heavy to know that.
Yeah, I feel that too. And one of the many commonalities, I guess, commonalities of the theme here today, I thought you did an incredibly wonderful job of representing that, and you had a villain that for want of a better word, that could readily present itself. There was a developer who wanted to build a marina on this beautiful peninsula, and she describes it so exquisitely. And I feel the same way. Anyone who wants to be here and loves the place as I do, I have no problem with them at all. But I do have a problem with people exploiting the place for their own profit, and then hoodwinking those who actually buy from them. So you buy a place as a relative newcomer here, and you walk into a situation and you suddenly say, oh my God, people are being pushed out all the way. I'm not that kind of person. I didn't want to do this. This was for sale. And so you singled out the development angle, I thought, extremely well, and brought a lot of clarity to that. And I really appreciate it.
I might have had some of these other issues that really have just become so exacerbated during the pandemic, but I finished my book before the pandemic. So, you know, mine is focused on this one conflict about the potential development of the land. But there's a scene at the end of the book, this is not really a spoiler, but there's a scene at the end of the book where the developer is sitting with one of the women who is one of the shareholders, and he says, yeah, but you know, your people were developers too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't just give this to me. I mean, he says it like not quite as harshly as that, but I felt it like that. It's like, you know, let's all realize who we are here, and let's all understand what this place once was. I mean, you came and you saw it too.
Right.
But other people were here before that, and you know that ends up being a big plot of the book. But you know, I think these questions of legacy are so powerful and complicated. I was listening to Rose talk this morning about Am I saying your name right? Yeah.
Oh, Rio.
Rio. At Rio's talk, I'm sorry. Rio's talk this morning, and she made such a powerful point about, the past ends at a certain point. If you came from an enslaved background, and my husband knows back to his grandparents, and that's it. They came in the early 1900s, Jewish refugees, and there really is no knowledge at all of anyone from the past. And I have huge knowledge of my past. And there was a day, I don't know when, a certain amount of years ago, when I all of a sudden went, that's incredible. It's incredible to know that kind of a background. And I feel like that informs a lot of these ideas about legacy, and how to think about it, to understand the people who sort of take that for granted and the people who can't take that for granted, and how that affects our ideas about land ownership and land transfer.
Absolutely, and from a character development standpoint, like you, I mean, my family, I know they go on insufferably, but from a character development standpoint, I think we both imbued elderly female characters with a strong sense of stewardship and legacy, and they're somewhat burdened by it, although they may not see it that way. And they carry various attributes forward in time that are fascinating, and it's fascinating to watch their beliefs smash up against more modern beliefs, so the beliefs of people who think in ways that their ancestors would never have thought. And the stewardship of wealth and property and all of that also creates characters that intrigue me. They have a sense of themselves that's different from others. And I have one character in The Distance Between Us that has taken that to the ultimate extreme. He's a descendant from the Astor family, and has basically won't give up a single possession that he has unless he goes into bankruptcy, and he has to do it. And everything that he has is an acquisition, and everything is a story, and everything is a history. And he ends up in Provincetown. I put him in the Stull House in the East End. There's a marvelous kind of colonial-style house down there, and he's the fictitious owner of it. And he's surrounded by moldering books and statuary and paintings and all of these things, and totally incapable of an emotional connection with anyone unless he rents it, basically. And I knew people that, though they didn't rent people, but they had all these possessions, and they had this strong sense of themselves, and the money had frittered away. And yet they were these confined characters. And I thought you handled that quality within Agnes in particular, who is certainly not as penurious or anything. Yeah, I thought you handled that magnificently. Could you talk more about her?
Yes, she really is the main character of the book, even though she was sort of the last of my central characters to come into my imagination. But she starts 80. She's had a couple of bouts with cancer. She's had all kinds of things happen in her past. She's what I think of as a larger than life character. And I really wanted to write that because my book is definitely in conversation with 19th century novels and some of the tropes of those kind of books, one of them being larger than life characters, and another one being land ownership, which is why I had 2 female landowners. Didn't exist in 19th century novels because guess what? Women were not allowed to own land. If they weren't allowed to have a say over what was going to happen with her land. So I really created her as someone, let me just say one of the big things about Agnes and Polly is they're both Quakers. So their Quakerism informs a lot of their ideas about materialism. They don't think of themselves as particularly materialistic, which is a very Philadelphia Quaker attitude, aside from the fact that they own this amazing piece of land. I mean, I grew up with these people, and the bear rugs, 30-year-old Volkswagen, and then you find out they have millions of dollars. yeah, it's a particular style, but she feels this love of the land so deeply and so strongly. And she feels it so deeply that at the end of the book, she really is able to see what should happen with the land. Yeah, that was my main thinking of making her, sort of a difficult person, but a person who is honest with herself.
Mhm.
She has trouble being a Quaker. Polly doesn't. Polly's just sort of naturally, she's naturally a person who can think, these are my values and I'm going to practice them. Agnes is like, these are my values and this is my personality. And they don't exactly match. So it's a little bit of a struggle for her. But let's, over to you about having an older woman being the protagonist. I still think that's a very unusual thing. And we both did that.
Well, I think in some ways Lola was the easiest character for me to write because I would say she's probably 80% my grandmother, my beloved grandmother, who was, my Auntie Mame, and I think she saw a young gay grandson and thought, oh boy, here we go, I'm gonna make sure this kid gets it right. And she was fabulous. She was just absolutely fabulous. And she had, a house full of things from her family, her parents. I have things in my home, and I know where they were in my great-grandparents' house in 1850. She inculcated all of that in me. And she was a Victorian, born in 1896. She was very mannered, and there were definite things to be a lady. So in some ways, Lola flowed onto the page, but what I think I brought to Lola that she didn't have was the being a recluse. My grandmother was anything but a recluse. But Lola, had been shamed. The idea that her father might have been a murderer, she shut down her entire life. It was so against society as she knew it back then. So that was sort of that dimension. You said a couple of things that I really want to be sure that we spend a little time on. You're writing a 19th century novel. And I love the way you do that, and I think we should have in common the fact that we used styles. I went back to Jane Austen with deliberate intent because I wanted to get the character of Helena across, and I wanted people to buy in and support her and yearn for her. And I realized that when I read Pride and Prejudice, which I do with such regularity, I'm ashamed to admit how frequently I read it, you find yourself loving Elizabeth's irreverence, and you find yourself, loving her strength, and you find loving her sarcasm, and you're very engaged with her. So I tried one of the things I said to myself was, I've got this big character, Helena. I mean, she's big, she goes from in the scene where she walks in and the guy taking the shower, one second she's Mrs. Danvers, the next minute she's Nora Desmond. I mean, she just flits from character to character to character. And so I wanted to get her into that space where the reader would, I hope, fall in love with her, start rooting for her as they would for Elizabeth Bennet, and maybe at some point say, oh yeah, that's that guy in the dress. And the next time that pastor starts talking about the evil of trans people or gay people or anything, maybe it would be like, well, wait a minute. I could relate to Helena. I liked Helena. She made me feel the same way I felt when I read whatever it is. So that was my intent.
Well, you have a lot of conversations about being a female impersonator in the book. She has to do some heavy lifting, explaining to people
yes.
What this is all about. But I think you handle those things and a lot of the other issues that you're writing about in the book with a lot of deftness, because it's inside of a mystery and it's inside of a lot of plot.
Yeah.
So these little moments come where someone will say, where Helena will say, well, sometimes women object to female impersonation because they feel like it's making fun of them. And then there's like a discussion of it that's really goes down very easily because of where you put it. but you get at a lot of very serious issues. So I do think you covered a lot of that so well.
Thank you. This might be a moment too, because I do want to share the backstory for the character of Helena. It's part of, I guess, in a way, a sense of penance that I feel for something happened when I was really quite young. I went to a regional school about 50 miles south of Boston, and my only sister is 4 years younger than I am. So as the good brother, I'm in music school, and I'm in the process of coming out, and I come back to see her school play. Well, when I was at the high school, there was one of the most horrifying things I think I've ever considered that's come in any proximity to me, at least. I would call this, I mean, if the world were sane, this was two young men having an early sexual experience, not anything, you know. If a boy and girl were found in this kind of situation, nothing would have ensued. Of course, rural small town, the librarian walks in and finds them in the reserved book room in the library. And the shortest summary I can give you of this, if those of you who know Bewitched, she went Major League Gladys Kravitz. She went berserk. And she talked about it. And the administration handled it poorly, and everybody in town knew. And today, there would be grounds for a lawsuit given the way this was handled. But what they did was they expelled one of the individuals and forbade the other from attending gym class, which I would have, like, take me. I don't want to go to gym class. So we go forward 4 years, and I'm struggling to come out. I'm very tentative about it. I'm not out to anyone in my family. I'm really only out to the gay people that I've met in Hartford, Connecticut, far enough away to come out. And it's intermission at the play, and it's Mayberry. The tables are set up with the cookies. You've all been there. So I come in, and what's strange about this is that everybody that was in the audience is in one corner of the cafeteria, and they're in a huddle. And the image I like to express is as if a lion had confronted a herd of deer. They're all staring straight ahead, and they're all rigid. So I look over to the far corner, across the empty tables of cupcakes, and there is the individual that had been expelled, who was either transitioning or in the process of transitioning, I don't know at this point, I've never known, in a white pantsuit, long black hair, lipstick, mascara, holding a dozen roses, tears streaming down her face, confronting all these people that had done that to her. And I was afraid to go over and be supportive. And Helena, my Valkyrie, is the result of that. And I worked very hard to do those things that you're talking about, but I was driven by that experience. I mean it, it's a form of penance. I regret that. Of course, I'd be there in a heartbeat right now, but I just forget the language, I didn't have my shit together, and I didn't dare do it in front of my mother and my sister and all of that. And Helen sprung from that. And I think on some level, I'm guided by that episode, and so those sections in particular, I just hammer at them until they're correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you think we should take some questions? It's almost 4.
Yeah, I think we could do a little. We could probably go a little bit more. I have actually a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of questions for you. Can we talk about your entry point into the book? How did the book start for you? Could you talk a little bit about, who came first and when did Agnes arrive?
It was actually a different writing experience for me than previous writing experience, because this book has no basis in anyone I know. I think in my past writings I would have like, oh, I heard this story, or this person is interesting to me in some way and I want to write a little bit about them. But all these characters were made up, and I was so excited because for a long time I've wanted to have like a really good imagination, and it just wasn't my natural. My natural is more intellectual, actually. So I was very happy when Virgil, who's a character who mainly hit the cutting room floor, although he serves a plot function in the book, he came first. I wrote a couple of hundred pages about him. He ended up in a place like Fellowship Point, and there was Polly, and there was Robert, and then Agnes came along, and then Maud came along. You know, they just came along, and then after I had all the characters, I went in search of a plot, and the plot really came from visiting my school friend in California, and she was working for Janet Napolitano at the University of California, looking at all the land owned by University of California, which is hundreds of thousands of acres that have been donated or that they've bought, but mostly donation. And she said, you know, it's really interesting, a lot of the land was donated by women. And I said, oh, that is really interesting. And I started doing a lot of deep dive research on women landowners and all the laws about women's land ownership in this country. And it would be a good book if anyone wants to write a nonfiction book about this subject. There isn't one. But women really weren't allowed to have say over their land until the year 1900 in all the states. Some of the states permitted it, like starting in the 1870s. But that's very recent. That's very recent. So those were my, you know, I put those two things together, and I did have the idea I wanted to write something like a 19th century novel after I saw an Anthony Trollope miniseries. I was like, oh, I love that. I love these plots and with subplots and all kinds of things, and like sort of like a small town or a small area of people, but big things happening. So, you know, all of those things put together, but it took 6 years for it all to gel. It wasn't fast.
And what character, did any character, like, I remember, I didn't stalk you, but I did listen to your New York book review podcast and a number of things. Did any character, you said at the time, this thing, I like the book demanded an ending. Did any character run away with the book or lead you places to that ending that might have been unsuspected?
Definitely Agnes.
Yeah.
And I did have a different ending. In fact, it was set in pages with a different ending, like a different last 30 pages. And I just woke up one day and said, it's got the wrong ending. It's got what I think of as like a false tacked on ending, not an organic ending to the book. And I think that happens a lot. I see it a lot with my student writing that, you know, they're going along, developing, and then they get to a place where like, but this is what should happen. And, you know, that kind of ruins the book because you really have set up the ending, and all you have to do is allow it to come into your mind. So I asked my editor, can I please have it back? She said yes, very kindly, Mary Sue Rucci, who's a really great editor. And so I rewrote it, and I just did it, you know, I just went into the deepest, most intuitive place I could go. And I got what I feel is absolutely the right ending, and it was set up the whole time. You know, a lot of times it's like you drop all the clues, and then you have to read them. Right. So.
Yeah. In my case, I thought the book would end when the mystery ended, when the mystery was solved, and it refused. And there was one character, it's the character, the artist, who donated all of the paintings. She would not behave. I could not rein her in, and the book goes on, for better or worse, for a significant number of pages as her personal evolution unfolds. And I've become so proud of that. And it's been a mystery, no pun intended, to me that the book demanded something different from what I thought was going to happen. And that was the joy of this book for me.
Similar.
Yeah. Is this a good point to ask for any questions that anyone might have? Julia?
This is fascinating, and it is really wonderful how you found all these commonalities. But, you know, I'm really looking forward to reading your books.
Oh, thank you.
But I have a question for you, Alice, because I know and love your book, Fellowship Point, and as much as it is very much a homage to 19th century novels. One thing that's so modern about it is that the central relationship is this 80-year friendship between two women. And one of the things that really fascinated me about Agnes and Polly is that there's a huge difference between the two of them, in that Agnes is never married and had children, and Polly has. And can you talk a little bit about how you developed that? Because it comes to a head in a very realistic and moving way.
It does come to a head. You know, I do think that if they met each other as, let's say, 45-year-olds, they probably would not have been natural friends. They did go in completely different directions in their lives, but they grew up living next to each other. They went to school. They have that very powerful commonality of knowing each other in childhood, knowing each other's houses, knowing each other's families, siblings, all of that. But they did take different paths in life. Polly got married when she was supposed to, and she had 4 children like she was supposed to. One of them dies. You know that early on. It's not a spoiler. And Agnes, it's not that she didn't want to get married. It's that every time she came close to it, she just didn't have the ability to be anyone different than she was, and a lot of the men she ran into weren't particularly into that. But so I did have them. I mean, one of the things I really thought about with them is how do they maintain this friendship when they're so different? And they really did it by holding back a lot of their opinions of each other. They know, Polly knows very well that Agnes doesn't think Dick is good enough for her. That's Polly's husband. She knows it. Polly occasionally lets it out, but she never really says it. She'll just say, ugh, why are you going back? You know, stay and talk to me longer. Why are you going back home? And Agnes knows that Polly thinks that Agnes has all the time to herself. She can do whatever she wants all day, every day. Agnes has like a financial situation where she has to make money, but she really hasn't shared that even with Polly too much. And it does come to a head at a point where everything comes out, like 80 years worth of judgment, resentment. But I did think a lot about how do people maintain long friendships. It's not easy. And I was definitely raised with the idea of let a few days pass. Let a few days pass. Don't say anything. And that's what they do. I'm not saying I think that's right or wrong. I think it does lead to things like a huge blow up where you don't have any practice at all with conflict. You don't know how to discuss something difficult with someone because you just don't do it. But on the other hand, I think now I see so many relationships blow up because there's too much in the other direction. Like every little irritation gets raised, and nobody likes to be told that they're doing something wrong. So you have to be very careful about it. But yeah, I was so interested in writing about how they navigated such extreme differences. Their backgrounds are the same, they have all that, but their personalities are so different.
Any other questions?
Nothing? Nothing? Okay, this is a good time to stop then.
Thank you so much.